Welcome to Legal Potions. I'm your host, John Courtney, brought to you by LBC Law Group. And today what we're going to talk about is you don't have to do much to go to prison for burglary for a long time. And you know what? You can be completely innocent, and you might want to plead guilty to burglary just so you can get probation and avoid those small odds, even if they're tiny odds, of going to prison for a long time. Let me break it down. Let's compare common law burglary with Nevada's very broad statute on burglary. Before the statute was created, we relied upon common law. The common law definition of burglary is the breaking and entering of the dwelling of another at night with the intent to commit a felony inside. So let's break that down. It requires breaking, getting past the lock, for example. It requires entering, going inside. It requires it being a dwelling where someone lives. It requires it being at night, presumably because that's when most people slept when the common law was decided upon. And then it also requires that you have to have some malicious intent, the intent to go inside and commit some other crime inside it, a serious crime, a felony. In Nevada, they broadened that, very broad. In fact, instead of it being a felony, you can commit petty larceny. Instead of it being just a dwelling, it can be a business. In fact, the statute states business structure with the intent to commit grand or petty larceny, assault or battery on any person or any felony is guilty of burglary of a business. Stay tuned. This is a true story. Let's talk about how this law works now. This is a true story, based on one anyway. I've got to protect the innocent, or at least the client, because there's some attorney-client privilege. But let me give you the gist of it without revealing who the client is or when it happened. But fact pattern goes like this. Guy goes to a yard sale, moving sale really. The people are moving and they're just selling all kinds of stuff in the yard. He buys a power tool, a drill, like a hammer drill, in fact, one that will drill into concrete. And he uses this thing for about a year. He's working on a project, a shed in the backyard, needs to drill into the concrete foundation. And so he uses this thing, and then it hangs on the wall in his new shed for about a year, and he decides, I don't need this anymore. So he goes to sell this drill, and he walks into a pawn shop, and he's like, hey, here's the drill. How much will you give me for it? And they pay him for the drill. And then he gets arrested, and he's charged with burglary because he entered a pawn shop, a business, a structure. He went in there, they claim, the prosecution claims that he went in there with the intent to commit another crime. And that other crime that he went in to commit is selling of stolen goods. So they charge him with burglary. First time you ever do that, not a lot of aggravating circumstances. You could still face 5 years in prison if you're found guilty. But this gentleman that I'm talking about was offered probation because he'd never been in trouble before. And he was so afraid that he could see many years in prison that he went ahead and took the deal so that he would only be on probation. He didn't want to be removed from his children and his family, from his job, from his friends. And so he pled guilty. The tragedy here is that we all thought he was innocent. And he was only pleading guilty because of the harsh penalties of burglary. But let's even assume guilt under this fact pattern. You buy a hammer drill for $30 from a moving sale. You can't go back and find those people because they moved. And then you go to a pawn shop a year later and you sell the drill and they give you $10. That $10 transaction could land you 5 years. Do you plead guilty and only get probation? Or do you risk it and go to trial and maybe see years in prison? That's a tough one. Nothing in any of these videos on this website constitute legal advice. If you want legal advice, go to a lawyer's office, sign a retainer agreement, get some legal advice. We are not creating an attorney-client privilege by me talking to you for entertainment purposes only. You want some more cool legal nuggets? Not advice, nuggets. Like, subscribe, tell your friends about it.